All right, diving right in today. We're tackling something pretty fundamental, something we all do all the time but might not even realize it. Inductive reasoning. The problem of induction, it's a real head-scratcher, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It seems so basic. We see patterns, and we assume those patterns will continue, like the sun rising every day. But when you really dig into it, there's this philosophical puzzle lurking underneath.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're turning to some heavy hitters, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and of course, everyone's favorite quick reference, Wikipedia.
A potent combo. And they don't shy away from the big names Hume, Goodman, and the whole gangs here.
So before we get too deep into the weeds, for anyone just tuning in, what exactly is this problem of induction we're talking about?
Well, the problem of induction at its core is questioning whether we're really justified in making these leaps from what we've seen in the past to what we expect in the future. It's like, just because something has happened over and over again, does that guarantee it will keep happening?
Right, right. Like we all assume the sun will rise tomorrow.
Yeah.
But can we really be certain?
Exactly. And that's where David Hume comes in. He really shook things up back in the 18th century with his skeptical take on induction.
So Hume was like, hold on, everyone. Let's not get ahead of ourselves with all these predictions.
Pretty much. He argued that just because we've seen a pattern in the past, like, say, a million white swans, doesn't logically prove that the next swan we see won't be black.
Yeah. No matter how many white swans you've seen, there's always that tiny possibility.
Right. And Hume called this a change in the course of nature, that even if things have been consistent, there's no ironclad rule saying they have to stay that way.
Okay, so I get the theoretical problem here, but honestly, this feels a little unsettling. I mean, we rely on induction constantly, planning for the future, scientific discoveries. It's all built on this idea that patterns continue. If Hume is right, does that mean everything's just up in the air?
Well, it's important to note that Hume wasn't saying we should abandon induction altogether. He was more asking, okay, if pure logic can't prove that the future will be like the past, then what does justify our reliance on it?
Ah, so he's poking at the foundation of our reasoning, not necessarily telling us to throw out the whole system?
Exactly. He wasn't trying to paralyze us with doubt, but rather get us thinking critically about what underlies our beliefs.
That's a good point. So, okay, if pure logic can't justify induction, what have other philosophers proposed? Our sources mention this idea of a priori knowledge. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. A priori knowledge is essentially knowledge that doesn't depend on experience. It's knowledge you can have just by thinking about it, through reason alone. Like the statement, all triangles have three sides. You don't need to go out and measure a bunch of triangles to know that's true.
Right. It's true by definition. So how does that connect to this whole induction puzzle?
Well, some philosophers have argued that maybe there are certain a priori truths about the world that could act as a foundation for inductive reasoning. Immanuel Kant, for instance, proposed that maybe there are certain structures built into our minds, how we perceive the world, that make induction possible.
So Kant is saying there's something deeper going on than just observing patterns, like some kind of underlying principle that makes those patterns reliable.
That's a simplified way to put it, but yeah, that's the gist of his argument. It gets pretty complex, but the core idea is that maybe there are a priori principles shaping our experience and making induction a valid form of reasoning.
Okay, that's fascinating, but I have a feeling there are some counter-arguments here.
Of course. Not everyone agrees with Kant's solution. The debate about whether synthetic a priori knowledge that's independent of experience but still tells us something new about the world is even possible is still a hot topic in philosophy.
Right, right. So even a priori knowledge isn't a clean, universally accepted fix for the problem of induction.
That's right, and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Okay, well, if a priori knowledge doesn't solve it, what about probability? Can we bring in the math to help us justify induction?
That's another avenue that philosophers have explored extensively. The idea is to see if we can find an a priori justification using probability theory.
Okay, remind me how probability works again.
Well, think about Bayes' theorem. It's a fundamental concept in statistics that shows how we update our beliefs based on new evidence.
Right, right. So like if I think all swans are white because I've only ever seen white ones, then I see a black swan, boom, got to update my beliefs.
Exactly. And Bayes' theorem provides a precise way to calculate how our beliefs should change as we get new evidence. One classic example is the urn problem. You have an urn filled with black and white balls, you draw a sample, and based on that sample, you make inferences about the proportion of black and white balls in the whole urn.
So it's like using a small sample to make an educated guess about a larger population. kind of how we use past experiences to make predictions about the future.
Exactly. But here's the catch. With using probability to justify induction, to use Bayes' theorem, you often need to start with prior probabilities, those initial assumptions about the likelihood of different hypotheses.
That's a good point. Where do those initial probabilities come from? If they're based on our past experience, doesn't that make the whole argument circular? Like we're trying to justify induction using something that already relies on induction.
That's a major sticking point. Some argue we can set those prior probabilities based on a priori principles, like the principle of indifference, which says we should assign equal weight to all possibilities when we have no specific reason to favor one over another.
So we're assuming equal likelihood until we have evidence otherwise.
Right. But even that seemingly simple principle has faced a lot of criticism. It can lead to inconsistencies and weird paradoxes.
Okay, so using probability to justify induction also gets pretty tangled. Are we just going around in circles here?
Well, there are even more twists and turns to come. Now we have to bring in Nelson Goodman and his famous Grue paradox.
All right, hit me with it. I'm starting to enjoy this philosophical roller coaster.
So Goodman pointed out that the very way we choose to describe things can influence our predictions. Imagine a color we call Grue. An object is Grue if it's green before a certain time, say January 1st, 2025, and blue after that time.
Okay, so Grue is like a time-dependent color. Interesting, but how does that connect to induction?
Now, suppose we've only ever observed emeralds before January 1st, 2025, and they've all been green. Inductively, we might conclude all emeralds are green, but we could just as easily say all emeralds are Grue.
Wait, what? How does that follow?
Because if all the emeralds we've seen have been green before January 1st, 2025, then they also fit the definition of Grue. So are they all destined to turn blue after that date?
Whoa, my mind is bending a bit here. So even though we've only seen green emeralds, we can't rule out that they're all secretly Grue and about to change color.
That's Goodman's point. It highlights that there might be multiple ways the past could resemble the future, and the very concepts we use can influence which predictions we make.
This is getting deep. It feels like we're going down a philosophical rabbit hole here.
That's the fun of it. The problem of induction keeps unfolding the more we explore it.
All right, I'm ready for the next layer. Where does this Grue dilemma leave us in terms of justifying induction? So if Goodman is right, and our choice of concepts can totally mess with our predictions, are we back to square one? Is there any way to justify induction, or are we just doomed to be constantly surprised by Grue, emeralds, and whatever else the universe throws at us?
Well, Goodman wasn't saying that induction is completely hopeless or anything. He was more emphasizing how important it is to pay attention to the concepts we use and the assumptions we're making when we're talking about the past and the future,
Okay, so maybe instead of looking for one big rule that governs everything, maybe we need to think about induction in a more nuanced way. Like different situations might require different approaches.
Exactly. There might not be a one-size-fits-all solution to the problem of induction, but there might be different ways that the past can help us understand the future depending on the specific situation we're dealing with.
So how do we even start to justify induction then? If there's no single answer, does that mean we're just stuck?
Not necessarily. Some philosophers have proposed that instead of trying to prove that induction is always true, maybe we should focus on showing that it's useful.
So we're kind of shifting the goalposts here. Instead of aiming for absolute certainty, we're aiming for practicality.
Exactly. A good example of this is Hans Reichenbach. He was a philosopher of science, and he proposed what he called a pragmatic justification for induction. He said that if our goal is to predict the future, then induction is probably our best bet, even if we can't be absolutely certain that it will always work.
So it's like saying, hey, we can't guarantee that induction will never lead us astray, but if you want to make predictions about the world, it's the most reasonable option you've got.
That's a great way to put it. Reichenbach actually compared it to a doctor treating a patient with a mysterious illness. Even if the doctor isn't 100% sure that surgery will work, if there's a chance it could save the patient's life, it makes sense to try it.
I like that analogy. It really shows how we often have to make decisions even when we don't have all the information.
Exactly. And Reichenbach's approach shows us that justifying something isn't just about proving it with absolute certainty. It can also be about choosing the best course of action based on what we're trying to achieve and what evidence we have.
That's a really interesting point. It brings philosophy down to earth a bit. It's not just about abstract theories. It's about how we make decisions in real life where we're constantly dealing with uncertainty.
Absolutely. And when we talk about induction, we're making decisions based on our beliefs about the future all the time. Whether it's deciding what to wear based on the weather forecast or investing in a stock based on its past performance, we're relying on inductive reasoning.
So if we're following Reichenbach's thinking, we don't need to be able to prove that induction is always true to be justified in using it.
hmm
We just need to show that it's the most effective way to get what we want, given that the world is inherently uncertain.
That's one way to understand his argument. Of course, not everyone agrees with this approach. Some philosophers have argued that a pragmatic justification doesn't really address the deeper philosophical questions that Hume raised about knowledge and how our minds interact with the world.
Right. It seems like there's always another layer to peel back, another perspective to consider. But even if we can't completely solve the problem of induction, it feels like we're getting a better understanding of it with each new approach we look at.
Absolutely. Wrestling with these different arguments helps us to be more aware of the assumptions we're making when we think about the world. It's like we're shining a light on these mental processes that are usually hidden but that shape our beliefs and predictions.
It's like the more we struggle with the problem of induction, the more sophisticated our thinking becomes about knowledge and belief. We start to see the limits of our own reasoning, but we also start to appreciate the complexity of a world that doesn't always follow our expectations.
Exactly. And there are even more fascinating frameworks out there to explore. One that comes to mind is formal learning theory, which takes a more mathematical approach to understanding how we learn and make predictions.
Formal learning theory. That sounds kind of intimidating.
It can be a bit,
Yeah.
but the main idea is to analyze different learning methods based on how efficient they are in reaching certain goals. Like how quickly can a method find the right answer, and how many times does it have to revise its guesses along the way?
So it's like judging different learning strategies based on how well they perform objectively. Does formal learning theory have anything specific to say about induction?
Yes, it does. Some people who support formal learning theory say that induction is justified because it's a demonstrably efficient way to learn about the world, even if we can't be absolutely sure about the conclusions it leads to.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. It seems like a lot of these approaches are saying, maybe we can't prove that induction is perfect, but we can show that it's the most reasonable and effective way to navigate a world that's full of uncertainty.
That's a sharp observation. And this leads to another really interesting idea, meta-induction.
Meta-induction.
Yeah.
It sounds like we're going up a level here, like we're taking induction itself and making it the object of study.
You got it. Meta-induction is basically induction about induction. Instead of just looking at how successful our own individual inductive inferences are, we look at the track record of different prediction methods in general, and we tend to favor the ones that have been the most successful historically.
So it's like a higher level strategy for deciding which prediction methods we should trust. We're learning from the successes and failures of other prediction methods, not just our own.
Precisely. It's a way of being self-aware about how we learn and constantly improving our methods based on how well they've worked in the past.
I'm really loving this deep dive. It's challenging, but in a really good way. It's making me think about things that I usually take for granted, like how I form my beliefs about the world and make predictions about the future.
That's the beauty of philosophy. It pushes us to question our assumptions and explore different ways of understanding even the most basic parts of our experience.
So after all this mental exercise, where do we stand with the problem of induction? It feels like we've explored a whole philosophical landscape without finding a definitive answer, a clear solution. It feels like the more we dig into this problem of induction, the more layers we uncover. Is this just one of those philosophical mysteries that doesn't have a nice, neat answer?
That's part of what makes it so interesting, honestly. We might never totally solve the problem of induction, but just thinking about it is so valuable. It makes us look at our beliefs and really understand how uncertain the world is.
So even if we can't make our predictions perfect, just going through this process makes us think more carefully about how we approach knowledge and decisions.
Exactly. It encourages us to remember that our knowledge about the future is always a bit of a leap of faith, like an educated guess based on what we've seen before. But it also reminds us that those guesses can be pretty effective, especially when we know their limits and are willing to change our minds when we learn new stuff.
Okay, so after all this, what do we make of induction? We can't escape it, even if we can't perfectly justify it. It's like built into how we experience the world.
Maybe that's the main point here. Maybe the problem of induction isn't something we can solve. Maybe it's more like something that travels with us, reminding us to be humble about what we know and to stay curious about the future.
A little dose of philosophical humility. I like that. But to bring it back down to earth, what does this all mean for us in our everyday lives? When we make predictions about things, how do we know when we're making a reasonable guess versus just assuming something without any good reason?
That's the big question, isn't it? And honestly, it's something each of us has to figure out for ourselves. The problem of induction shows us that there's always going to be some risk, some uncertainty when we use the past to try to see the future.
It's like we're walking a tightrope between trusting our experience and knowing that something unexpected could happen at any moment.
Exactly. And being aware of that tightrope walk is a great place to start. It helps us question what we think we know, to be open to new information, and to be willing to adjust our beliefs when we need to.
So it's not about getting rid of that leap of faith entirely. It's more about being aware of it and making those leaps carefully.
Well said. That might be the most important thing we can take away from the problem of induction.
Wow. This has been a real mind bender. We've gone from Hume's skepticism to Goodman's Grue, and even touched on things like a priori knowledge and formal learning theory. My brain is definitely feeling a little overloaded, but in a good way.
It's always fun to tackle these big questions with someone who's eager to learn.
And to everyone listening out there, we hope this deep dive has made you curious and given you a fresh perspective on how we understand the world. The problem of induction might not have a simple solution, but it reminds us that it's good to question even our most basic assumptions.
So the next time you're making a prediction about anything, whether it's about the weather tomorrow or a big decision in your life, take a minute to think about the assumptions you're making and how your past experiences might be shaping those assumptions.
And remember, just because something has always happened a certain way in the past doesn't mean it'll keep happening that way. Stay open-minded, be curious, and keep asking questions. Until next time, happy diving.